Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. It's my first show after last week's general election. My name is Aaron Bastani. Tonight I have the immense pleasure, the immeasurable gratification of being joined by Helena, aka No Justice MTG. Helena, how are we?
I'm not doing too bad. Almost recovered my sleeping pattern back after screwing up during the general election stream. And good to be here to join you on my first Novara Live post-general election.
Let me get this straight. You did a 24-hour stream.
We were going to do 24 hours, but my Streamlabs at my OBS decided to die on me 16 hours into 15 and a half hours into the stream. So we got pretty far in, but chat were telling me to go to sleep anyway at that point. So we got close though.
It's pretty good. I have to say, I'm still very achy after last week. I'm still knackered. I was talking about this with my wife yesterday. I said I didn't go to the gym yesterday or the day before. And yet I feel like I've run a marathon. What is it? That's what covering an election is like for us here. Not just in Novara Media, but for people like Helena as well. Coming up later tonight, Keir Starmer has been asked what he'll do to address voters who abandoned Labour over Gaza, and his answer wasn't especially encouraging. As Suella Braverman has said, the pride flag is a, quote, monstrous thing, and Tony Blair has come out to say that Starmer's government need to prioritise harnessing artificial intelligence. Last week's election was unusual in a number of ways. One of them is that we have a ton of new MPs. Another is that the opposition now consists of a host of parties, featuring not just the Lib Dems and the SNP, but 4 Green MPs and 5 from Reform. And, of course, it saw Labour win their second largest majority ever, after Keir Starmer's party won 411 seats. Today saw that latest set of MPs arrive in the Commons to select the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle. After his selection, party leaders were invited to speak. And first up was Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker-elect, you preside over a new parliament, the most diverse parliament by race and gender this country has ever seen. And I'm proud of the part that my party has played in that, proud of the part that every party has played in that, including in this intake, the largest cohort of LGBT plus MPs of any parliament in the world.
I want to go over to you on this actually very quickly in a moment, Helena, but I find this stuff strange because, frankly, and as I said, as somebody who's half Iranian, I care about the background of these people economically. I care about the kinds of jobs they come from. If you say we have a very diverse parliament, but they all come from consulting, they all come from lobbying, I don't really care. Helena, quickly, am I being unfair?
I think I actually do disagree with you here a little bit, Aaron. I think that broadly having any amount of representation is good, especially when you have a diverse country. Making sure that there is some level of representation is good for social cohesion, I believe, rather than having kind of a single entity only represented or a single demographic only represented in Parliament. Regardless, like when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, my thought was, I mean, it's good that we finally have an ethnic minority Prime Minister. I think that's a good thing. It's just a shame that it had to come from the Conservative Party. But of course, that is second, as you say, to the policy and to the ideology behind what they do in government. But I think that you don't necessarily have to separate those two things out. You can certainly care more about the latter, but still pay attention to the former.
Yeah, I think I was probably being a bit hyperbolic. I obviously do care, but I just think it's entirely secondary. And on the point of LGBT MPs, I find it concerning when you have anti-trans rhetoric policy, and yet people talk about this stuff. And it's, again, that's a very large community. It's not a monolithic community. Anyway, we'll talk about that more later. We'll talk about that for many years to come, I'm sure. Starmer went on to address one Labour MP in particular.
Given all that diversity, Mr. Speaker-elect, I hope you will not begrudge me for a slight departure from convention to also pay tribute to the new mother of the House, Diane Abbott, who has done so much in her career over so many years to fight for a parliament that truly represents modern Britain. We welcome her back to her place.
We welcome her back, no Keir. You tried to block her from standing again. Fess up. Anyway, he had egg on his face then, and he's obviously changed tack now. Here's how Keir Starmer finished up.
And now, as in any new parliament, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to put an end to a politics that has too often seemed self-serving and self-obsessed, and to replace that politics of performance with the politics of service. Because service is a precondition for hope and trust, and the need to restore trust should weigh heavily on every member here, new and returning alike. We all have a duty to show that politics can be a force for good. So whatever our political differences, it's now time to turn the page, unite in a common endeavour of national renewal, and make this new Parliament a Parliament of service. Thank you.
Powerful message, the idea that politics should serve the people and not the political class. I suppose the question is that borne out in Keir Starmer's actions? Is he for the people or for a small clique of people around him in London? Helena, what do you think?
I think I'm going to echo a sentiment that you probably heard quite a lot recently, which is that Keir Starmer looks a lot more comfortable now that he's Prime Minister. He's certainly not a campaigner. He certainly, as he continues to tell us, was the Director of Public Prosecutions. And we know that that was a role that he definitely felt a lot more comfortable in a role where he's not having to, there is a brief that he's already got there rather than having to continue to campaign and try and attack people. He was very kind of nervy in the dispatch box when he was the leader of opposition at PMQs. Couple of bits of hypocrisy, though, as you touched on. First of all, like the absolute lies that he told about Diane Abbott and the ability and the desire of the people that he'd subcontracted out within the Labour Party to try and do the selection of MPs, to try and oust her, and then praising her the first thing during his speech in the Commons. And on top of that, coming off of the back of his statement about wanting to restore trust in politics, when he's then just blatantly going against what he said previously, on top of all of the other lies that he's told up to this point in what was, as has been described by many people, a very, very dishonest election campaign. And not just from Keir Starmer or the Labour Party, from lots of different sectors of our political class, continues to be very dishonest on loads of different occasions, but especially galling coming from Keir Starmer himself.
I put the country first. That's why 5 members of my NEC became MPs. The NEC decided who the MPs are, and we were told that the NEC wouldn't impose candidates. It was worse. The NEC were the candidates. People like Neil Coyle becoming MPs. Really? Is that in the public interest? Is that about politics of service? Anyway, another person whose Commons position has switched sides is, of course, the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Here he is addressing the Speaker now as the leader of the opposition.
In our politics, we can argue vigorously, as the Prime Minister and I did over the past 6 weeks, but still respect each other. And whatever disputes we may have in this Parliament, I know that everyone in this House will not lose sight of the fact that we are all motivated by our desire to serve our constituents, our country, and advance the principles that we honourably believe in. Yeah. And to every member, new and old, let me welcome them to their places and congratulate them on their results. To be sent to this place by one's constituents is the greatest honour, privilege, and responsibility. I know every one of us will be trying to repay the trust placed in us, and I look forward to continuing to represent the interests of my own rural North Yorkshire constituents. One of the great aspects of our system is no matter how high you rise, you still have that constituency which keeps you grounded. And my advice to all members is to appreciate the role that you have every day that you have it. And for those of us in my party, let me begin with a message to those who are no longer sitting behind me. I am sorry. We have lost too many diligent, community-spirited representatives whose wisdom and expertise will be missed in the debates and discussions ahead. It is important that after 14 years in government, the Conservative Party rebuilds. So now we will take up the crucial role of His Majesty's official opposition, professionally, effectively, and humbly. And restoring trust begins by remembering that being here is an opportunity to do what those we serve expect of us. And in our case, that means holding the new government to account.
Sunak playing the humble leader of the opposition. It's incredible watching the Tories on the opposition benches. They look physically diminished. It's quite extraordinary to watch. I was looking there as well at Jeremy Hunt, who looks exhausted, by the way. Obviously, politicians, they get older and whatnot, but he's been in the public eye for the best part of 15 years. He has been the Peter Pan of the Conservative benches. No more. I think trying to keep Godalming against all the odds, the Lib Dems won all their targets except Godalming and Ash, Jeremy Hunt's seat, has obviously knackered him. Not a surprise, but like I say, that elixir of power is no longer there to mollify the pain, the hardship, the suffering, the toughness of having to campaign. Maybe some of them don't quite fancy being in politics if they're not in government. And now after Starmer and Sunak, the father of the house, Edward Lee, and the mother of the house, Diane Abbott, both spoke. And I want to show you a couple of images that I really think show how outdated not just the House of Commons is, but how outdated our political system is. This is from when Diane Abbott spoke. You're about to see an image here. And as you can see, obviously Diane Abbott is on her feet. People are smiling. You have people there, including Dan Carden, a bunch of Labour MPs, literally sitting on the stairs. Now, this is because we have a chamber which is too small for the number of people in it. Here's another image, and this is from when Rishi Sunak was speaking. Again, that's people standing up because there's literally not enough space for them to sit down. This includes members of the cabinet, including right at the front there, Louise Haigh. She's in charge of transport. So these aren't just hangers-on. These are quite serious, important people in government. There's literally nowhere for them to sit. This is not a school assembly. This is their place of work. Really, really visually shows how outdated, antiquated our political system is, but also how we just don't do quite obvious basic stuff like maybe have fewer MPs or maybe have a larger chamber. I would argue do both. The leaders of all the other parties were also invited to say their bit to the Speaker, and that meant we heard for the very first time Nigel Farage MP speaking in the House of Commons.
We are the new kids on the block. We have no experience in this Parliament whatsoever, even though some of us have tried many times over the years previously to get here. So we can't judge you from working in this place, but we can judge you from the way the outside world sees you. I don't just mean the United Kingdom, I mean the world, because Prime Minister's Questions Time is global box office politics. And it's pretty clear to everybody that you act with great neutrality, that you have brought tremendous dignity to the role as Speaker. So we absolutely endorse you entirely for this job. And it is, I must say, in marked contrast to the little man that was there before you and besmirched the office so dreadfully in doing his best to overturn the biggest democratic result in the history of the country. We support you, sir, fully.
Nigel Farage there, of course, referring to John Bercow, who was Lindsay Hoyle's predecessor as Speaker of the House. Quite interesting in so much as people were, you could hear audibly people not very satisfied with his comments. John Bercow was a former Conservative MP, but he's got a lot of respect across the Labour benches because, as Farage has kind of implied or said out loud, he was quite interested in hamstringing Brexit. Some would say on purpose, some would say, well, procedurally, that was his job. But whatever. What I found interesting with that little clip there was that immediately Farage is telling us what he thinks about Westminster politics. He says it's box office, right? He's looking at this as a media spectacle. This is TV. I mean, it's meant to be the legislative heart of the British political system, but for Farage, it's about clips, right? It's box office. And then he says the little man, right? This is very Trumpian. So just in that 1-minute clip, we already get a very strong hint of how he will conduct himself as a Member of Parliament. Another new voice in the Commons is Green Party co-leader Adrian Ramsay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker-elect, and congratulations on the support you have received from across this House today. And I can already say on behalf of the new cohort of Green MPs that we have been very pleased with the support you have given us, where you've shown that you go out of your way to support new members in this House and support MPs from all parties to be able to hold the government to account and represent our constituents. And I know I speak on behalf of all the Green MPs, and I'm sure all the new MPs, in saying we are very conscious that we are here first and foremost to be constituency MPs, to represent our residents, and we appreciate your support in enabling us to do that. May I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister about the importance of politics being about public service. And I very much hope in this new Parliament we can all move to a less tribal form of politics where we work together, where we can agree and move things forward in the national interest.
I mean, I found that clip, I'm saying all these clips are so interesting. They're all so different, right? Farage is talking about box office, national media profile. Adrian Ramsey has literally made something there for his constituency. I'm a great constituency MP. It's the first thing he's going to raise in Parliament, and I'm willing to work with other people. Now, I know lots of people say, wow, Adrian Ramsey is so underwhelming. He's kind of boring. What they seem to forget, I think, is that he is a Green MP in a former Tory stronghold. You don't want to have a left-wing, rhetorically speaking, firebrand, right? This probably is the best approach, frankly. It's just my opinion. Helena, I'd love to know your views on that, but also if you could just respond to those clips more broadly. What are the kind of dynamics you're expecting from this new Parliament?
I mean, certainly I agree with you around Adrian Ramsey. And I think that broadly, there's a big difference, as you say, between the kind of thing Farage said and everybody else. I mean, I was watching a couple of the other ones, like Liz Saffron-Roberts as well. They mentioned their roles of service and their duty to their constituency and to the House. And Nigel Farage is one of the only MPs not to do that. It's very, very clear that he's trying to make these tracks, trying to essentially build upon the platform that he only previously had in terms of traditional media, and then coming through to this kind of privileged position that he has as an MP. This was clearly for what had been Farage's strategy for a very, very long time. Obviously, he's tried to be an MP for ages. And the only reason he's ever been doing this is to try and raise his own personal profile so that he has a parapet to be able to speak from, to be able to push forward his own personal beliefs that he has. He is, of course, somebody who has very strong beliefs. He's not a grifter. He is somebody who is very sincere in the things that he believes. And he has always believed that the best way to do that is by maximising reach as much as possible, hence his continued runs for Parliament that he mentioned there as well. Although interesting again that he hasn't mentioned the idea of service once in his speech, which tells you also the kind of things that he believes in too. With regards to the future of what we're expecting from the Commons, things could go to one of two ways. First of all, is that Labour have a gigantic majority. It's a huge majority at this point in time. And there is a real problem that we do have, is that if there isn't enough of a force trying to actually oppose what Labour are doing or provide them with scrutiny and accountability, then the Commons could make for very kind of dull and procedural policy making in future, where you can essentially never have any opposition to what Labour are trying to pass through the Commons, which is clearly their strategy during the election as well. But there is also the chance that because the Conservatives, they've been absolutely decimated, their numbers have been reduced so much, and the smaller parties have got much bigger voice than they ever had previously. The Dems having a gigantic number of seats in comparison to previously, and of course, Reform and the Greens attacking from multiple different sectors of the electorate, the ideological makeup of the electorate during the Commons time period as well, wanting to have their voices heard. Things upon the opposition benches could get quite raucous, could get a little bit more feisty than we've seen in previous times, whereas there was a unifying voice under the Conservative Party previously in opposition. We now have a multitude of different people who are vying for some level of recognition, given how fractured the state of the opposition benches are. The last point that I would make about the speeches that were given today, I just want to give a shout out to Colm Eastwood, who, whilst the DUP leader was making their speech, mentioned Londonderry, and you can just hear Colm Eastwood correcting him to Derry in the background. A little moment from me as well.
That's the sort of detail that we love to hear on the show. And I have to say, they often come from yourself. On the MP's point, I mean, it's true, Farage doesn't mention service. And it's incredible, isn't it? Just from those clips, you immediately see the sort of dividing lines between the new political parties. Miranda Green at the FT over the weekend actually made a really good point. She said that if Trump wins the second term, as is very likely, obviously Starmer as British Prime Minister will fall in lockstep behind US foreign policy. He just will, because of the deep state, just because of how Britain and the establishment views foreign policy. We have to do everything that the United States asks of us. That's basically what we've been doing since 1941. Obviously, if Corbyn was PM, that would have changed, but it takes a really disruptive politician to do that. And what she said is, if you have Trump and Britain falling in lockstep behind him, obviously that'd be deeply unpopular with the vast majority of people. The Tory party can't channel that. And all of a sudden, actually, those four Greens, those independents, Jeremy Corbyn, can make massive political hay. It's a big political opportunity for them. And people might be watching this saying, oh, Aaron, you want to split the left? No, it's a very good opportunity to ensure that the Labour government doesn't massively fall out of alignment with the views of the British public. Actually, we are building people-powered media here at Novara Media, and I think we have a hell of a lot of work to do over the next 5 years. I personally think this was a good set of results for the left. I think if Wes Streeting had lost to Liane Mohammed, which was only 500 votes in it, I think that would have been extraordinary. I think we can continue to push the political and policy debate in a good direction over the next 5 years. Help us do that. Go to novaramedia.com/support. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has managed to keep a spot in Parliament after being elected to the newly redrawn constituency of Fareham and Waterlooville. But she's recently flown to Washington, D.C. to say this.
Far, far too many Tory politicians agreed, and still agree, that the progress flag must be flown. To be kind, to be inclusive. It shows how liberal and progressive we are. And that's what many Conservatives want us to be. Well, the progress flag says to me, it says to me one monstrous thing, that I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of our children in our hospitals and from our schools.
It's very clear to me that Suella Braverman is, it's personally, it's my opinion, I guess, that she's a grifter. Like, this is somebody who understands that the brand of conservative politics that they've been running on for a very, very long time, of sound economics and liberal values, it's dying a death, both here and across the pond as well. There's a reason why she's doing all of her speeches over in Washington, D.C. She went to the American Enterprise Institute to make her big speech about the failure of multiculturalism in the UK, and has also did her little grifty trips to Israel as well, to take the side of Netanyahu further, indeed, than many other conservative politicians would have gone. Now, of course, this could also be part of her personal brand to try and stand for Conservative Party leader, but it's clear to me that she believes that in the absence of sound economic management being part of the Conservative brand, the only way that they can win, and also on top of that, the only way that she can market herself, is trying to move the Conservative brand closer to Reform UK, closer to the culture war, closer actually away from the median voter, really and truly. The Labour Party's plan over this election was to win over the median voter by being essentially entirely about sound economic management. And if she continues down this road, it may make her a lot of money on the circuit, and may make her a lot of money being able to do these speeches for all these different kind of think tank institutions like the Heritage Foundation, etc., etc. But will it lead the Conservative Party to electoral success? Probably not. But what it will do is it will absolutely drag down the debate in this country, forcing all of our media and political class to try and pander to the overexposed opinions of people who have the backing of financial institutions, who are using their power to be able to undermine the rights of minorities in this country, which could lead to pretty scary times ahead for people in my community.
That was Braverman speaking at the National Conservatism Conference. But LGBT rights weren't the only area where Braverman took aim at the government that she was involved in as Home Secretary. Because over at the Popular Conservatism Conference, a separate conference, Braverman gave this summary of the Tories' track record on immigration.
We didn't mention immigration. We didn't want to talk about immigration. We didn't want to see immigration. But immigration spiraled out of control. And we failed and refused to tackle head-on the discussion about the role of out-of-control population growth in one very small place, and the pressure that has put on pushing asset inflation sky high, on putting pressure on our public resources and our services, and on our cultural and national identity. Didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to look at it. And as a result, people felt very angry and very betrayed with our track record. So, to my mind, that's a diagnosis of what went wrong. And in a nutshell, that can be summed up as, we did not do what we promised to do.
We were just saying, that looks like something out of 1984, or John Hurt in V for Vendetta, Ingsoc. Very strange. Why would you lean into those aesthetics when it's your politics? Anyway, what she had to say about reform was also highly instructive.
The level of catastrophe really was aggravated by the fact that reform emerged on the political landscape as a phenomenon. Now, to my mind, the reform phenomenon was entirely predictable and avoidable and all our own fault. It's no good denigrating reform voters. It's no good smearing the Reform Party. It's no good comparing reform rallies to the rallies of Nuremberg. That's not going to work. Criticizing people for voting reform is a fundamental error to make. Historically, in British politics, we have had the monopoly on the right-wing vote. That's one of the reasons why we've been so successful politically. The left, by contrast, for the last 100 years, has been split. Left-wing voters have had a choice of party to go for. And we, by contrast, have had the luxury of a monopoly, but no longer.
What is going on there? Because the sound quality is really good. They've clearly got a good connection, but the image is literally from like a 1980s video camera, and she's blue. Why is she blue? I don't get it. Why is she blue? I understand poor image quality. Why is she blue? She's talking there about why the Tories lost, and it's obviously fair to say that yes, the right-wing vote was split, and she's lamenting about immigration. But what she's failing to mention is Rwanda, which was, this totemic policy that she tied herself to as Home Secretary. It's just been cancelled by Keir Starmer. It cost this country hundreds of millions. We're pretty sure we've now lost £270 million. Kigali and Paul Kagame, the government over in Kigali, Rwanda, they are refusing to give us the money back. Wow. It's just extraordinary. The Tories gave hundreds of millions of pounds to Rwanda for nothing. That will have a massive impact on the Tory political brand for a very long time. And that's on you. But like so many people in the Conservative Party, I have to say in politics more generally, but they've lost. So let's stick with Tories. She is incapable of taking personal responsibility. Helena, here's a question for you. Do you think Suella Braverman, given the excuses she was making for reform and given the political tone of what she said in that first clip we played with regards to LGBT rights, the pride flag, etc., is she trying to be thrown out of the Conservative Party so she has a license to join reform?
I don't think so. It's interesting to think about. I've not really contemplated the idea that somebody might want to do that who is in such a big position to essentially be the leader of the opposition in a few weeks' time. She's a really big figure in the Conservative Party. There are obviously plenty of other people who are vying for support there, but she's certainly got an undercurrent of support within members, whether she can corral the Parliamentary Conservative Party around her, given how much of a wrecker that she was in the background as a backbencher at the time. That's an interesting postulate. I don't know. Really don't know whether or not she would be trying to get thrown out of the Conservative Party for that, given, again, how much of a wrecker she was beforehand. It's surprising that she didn't get thrown out before now. What is interesting, though, is that when she talks about things like immigration, she says, this is good. We've ceded ground on the right. And I'm like, well, actually, immigration isn't necessarily like a right-wing issue in particular. Right-wing parties certainly focus on it. But the electorate, the people who she says that they lost to Reform UK didn't just come from the Conservative Party. They came throughout the electorate. And only a third of them said that they would back the Conservatives. And it's difficult to think about whether or not that she would be in a position to be welcomed by somebody like Nigel Farage, given the figure that she holds in politics as well. Because it's clear that Nigel Farage has no intention at all of being part of the Conservative brand at this point. He's been very clear personally, and maybe he's got a bigger plan that I don't know about, but he's been very clear about wanting to destroy the Conservative Party. And if the movement in politics moves towards reform and away from the Conservatives, it's clearly within Suella Braverman's personal interests to defect to Reform UK. But I don't think she needs to get thrown out to do that.
Her majority went down from 26,000 to 6,000. Reform came fourth, but they got 9,000 votes. So it was, 17,000 for Suella Braverman and then like 11,009 and 8. It's not four-way marginal because she has still a reasonable majority. So it was 17,000 for Suella Braverman, 11,000 for Labour, 9,000 Lib Dem, 9,000 Reform. So frankly, as somebody moderately familiar with that seat, if she stood for Reform, she'd have a bigger majority. And it's something that Nigel Farage said to Lee Anderson, if only more of your colleagues had crossed the floor or at that point, joined Reform, like Lee Anderson did uniquely, they would still have their seats. And by the way, he's right. Many of them would. Not many, probably about a dozen more of them would. So from a personal point of view, it is interesting. It is interesting. I mean, is she going to jump ship now? I don't know. It may make political sense to do it before the next general election. We'll see. Tony Blair has made a lot of rare interventions since Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister last week. In fact, he's been in the news almost every day. His organisation, the Tony Blair Institute, has had very public views on immigration, digital ID cards, the new government having to raise taxes, and so much more. Today, the TBI is holding its Future of Britain conference in London. And it's there that Blair is arguing for public sector adoption of artificial intelligence. Why? Because they say it could save £12 billion a year by the end of this decade. And they've even published a report accompanying that event. It's titled The Potential Impact of AI on the Public Sector Workforce, a companion to the economic case for reimagining the state. Very grandiose. How unlike Tony Blair. It starts with the claim that public sector productivity has been flat for more than a quarter of a century. Now, that sounds bad, doesn't it? We want it to go up. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that because we have an aging population and elderly care is incredibly labour intensive, as is healthcare in general. So staying still when it comes to productivity, actually, in healthcare, for instance, is a bit of an achievement. You can't increase productivity for education and healthcare like you can for data. We're not moving numbers around on a spreadsheet. We're trying to help people. It's very, very labour intensive. It's very much apples and pears. Anyway, this is possibly the most important part of the whole report, and it was right towards the start. Our results indicate that more than 40% of tasks performed by public sector workers could be partly automated by a combination of AI-based software, for example, machine learning models and large language models, and AI-enabled hardware, ranging from AI-enabled sensors to advanced robotics. These efficiency gains could help save a fifth of public sector workers' time in aggregate. These potential time savings could lead to significant fiscal savings if the government chose to bank them by reducing the size of the public sector workforce accordingly. It goes on to say this. However, not all these time savings will lead to a lower wage bill and fewer public sector workers. Many public sector professions already face severe staff shortages, with workers doing significant amounts of unpaid overtime to keep the system afloat. We assume that the benefits of AI in these stretch professions, which account for 2.3 million workers and include maths, science, and language teachers, so just STEM teachers, apparently they're the only workers that are overstretched in schools, doctors, nurses, and care workers, do not lead to job cuts, but instead allow frontline workers to work fewer unpaid overtime hours and deliver better outcomes. Excluding these cases from the analysis reduces the overall potential time savings from AI from 1/5 to 1/6, but still implies savings of £41 billion a year to the public sector wage bill, 1.5% of GDP, if AI were used to its fullest possible extent. This is really significant. I know there's lots of words there, long paragraph. The Tony Blair Institute, the most influential think tank right now, the Labour government, is saying we can save £41 billion a year by laying people off and using technology. So basically, if you aren't a teacher in STEM, a healthcare worker or a care worker, the plan is that AI can and should make you redundant. I guess at least they're being upfront. The report then goes on to say this. To achieve these gains, the government will need to invest in AI technology, upgrade its data systems, train its workforce to use the new tools, and cover any redundancy costs associated with early exits from the workforce. Under an ambitious rollout scheme, we estimate these costs equate to £4 billion a year on average over this parliamentary term, 0.15% of GDP, and £7 billion per year over the next over the next parliament, 0.24% of GDP. In the long run, we estimate annual running costs of about £4 billion in today's terms. This implies the net savings from fully utilising AI in the public sector to be nearly 1.3% of GDP each year, equivalent to £37 billion a year in today's terms. This equates to a benefit cost ratio of 9-to-1 in aggregate, and since the setup costs of the programme are relatively small, the net benefit is positive almost straight away. Wow, how convenient. Indeed, even after 5 years, we estimate the programme could cumulatively save 0.5% of annual GDP, or £15 billion in today's terms, implying a benefit cost ratio of 1.8-to-1 is possible if the technology is rolled out quickly. So utilising AI could save us over £30 billion a year. It sounds so easy. Wow, £30 billion a year. We had no money. Suddenly we have so much money because of AI. Now, I wonder how these top researchers at the TBI arrived at such truly remarkable figures. Was it through original research, asking some of the world's brightest minds about what the near future will look like? You'd imagine so. But no, as it turns out, they asked ChatGPT. And no, I'm not joking. Here's the report later on explaining its methodology. We first used GPT-4 to categorize each of the 19,281 tasks in the ONET database in several different respects that we consider to be important determinants of whether the task can be performed by AI or not. These were chosen following an initial analysis of GPT-4's unguided assessment of the automatability of some sample tasks in which it struggled with some assessments. This categorization enables us to generate a prompt to GPT-4 that contains an initial assessment as to whether it is likely that the task can or cannot be performed by AI. In the final stage, we asked GPT-4 to categorize the type of AI tool that could be used to perform the task, estimate the time saving, and give an assessment of whether it could be cost effective to deploy the tool. You might be thinking, these are long passages, Aaron. This is important. ChatGPT is assessing the cost savings of AI in the public sector. That itself is remarkably stupid, but it's also the basis for a report which says we can lay off public sector workers to the extent that we save £41 billion. £41 billion worth of labour can be expelled, and my source is ChatGPT. I mean, it actually defies belief. But then, of course, you remember who Tony Blair is. This is, after all, the Tony Blair Institute, so it begins to make a little bit more sense. There's also, however, something more sinister at work here. Because the report says, to quote, achieve these gains, the government will need to invest in AI technology, upgrade its data systems, train its workforce to use the new tools, and cover any redundancy costs associated with early exits from the workforce, i.e. layoffs. People being replaced by technology. But AI and data systems is the key word here, cost a lot of cash, although of course it's an investment. But here's the thing. Do you know who the single biggest funder to the Tony Blair Institute is? Well, it's a man called Larry Ellison. He's the executive chairman at Oracle, and has reputedly given over $100 million to TBI in recent years, and is planning on giving another $200 million. So £300 million from Larry Ellison to the Tony Blair Institute. But I'm sure it has absolutely zero impact on their findings. Well, actually, I wouldn't be so sure, because in 2022, Oracle bought the US electronic health record company Cerner for almost $30 billion. And Mr. Ellison, well, he wants the company to be a world leader in digital health data. But I'm sure they'll go nowhere near the NHS. Of course, they spent $30 billion just for a bit of a laugh. And the fastest growing area for Oracle? Well, it's Oracle Cloud. That's a cloud computing service providing servers, storage, network applications, and services through a global network of Oracle Corporation managed data centers, which is just what the NHS will need if these proposals were ever implemented. Helena, this is a giant grift on so many levels. There's the elite grift with Larry Ellison and the funding of the TBI. And then there's the kind of amateur hour grift, which is, well, we need to make the argument to give these contracts to these people. So we're going to use ChatGPT.
No, I'm no Luddite, Aaron. I think that utilising as much technology as we can to maximise productivity, to maximise the productive forces in our society, whether in the public or private sector, can only be a good thing, right? But asking ChatGPT to decide how we do that is a bit like asking Israel to investigate their own military conduct at this point, really and truly. But as you say, things are very sinister here. Things are very sinister. Now, we've all talked about the trading that's going on in the background of the Starmer administration over who sets policy. There are three main think tanks that are really involved in setting Labour policy, and it is Labour Together, who've talked about extensively. There is the Resolution Foundation, who are now MPs in the Commons for the Labour Party, and there's, of course, the Tony Blair Institute. Now, Tony Blair has basically spent his whole career since being in Parliament, even when he was in Parliament, when he was actually the Prime Minister, being the go-between between access to government funding in the public sector and big business. That's what the Labour conference were during the New Labour period. It was just this roadshow for big business to come and see what they could get access to at the future Labour government. Peter Oborn's done some good work on looking into these fixes between government and big business that have kind of emerged in the neoliberal period. And let's have a look, right? On top of all of the conflict of interest that we've got going on here, and people who will have definite material interests in access to government money to do contracts for whatever happens in this further technological advancement in how we run public services in this country. Look at the people who were speaking at the Future of Britain convention the Tony Blair Institute was running, which was the only two Labour MPs were Wes Streeting and Pat McFadden, the only two people who were actually speakers at this TBI convention, this summit. And they're firmly from the right of the party. But Pat McFadden is the brains behind a lot of what's happening within Starmer's Politburo that he's got going on at the top of the party. So these kind of connections are going to be really important for the government. And it looks like the TBI have more power than I thought they would. I thought they kind of lost out to Labour Together. But no, clearly they do have far more power than I expected in setting the direction on policy. And on top of that, you know as well as I do, Aaron, you especially will know, that the biggest problem with technology and automation is ownership. It's ownership of how we do these things. Of course, any productivity gains are excellent. We're happy to see productivity gains. That lowers the amount of work that people have to do, right? People don't mind getting laid off if they get compensated by a universal basic income, by spreading the proceeds of all of those productivity gains equally amongst the people who actually still do the work, therefore reducing necessary labour time within society. But that's not what's going to happen. The ownership of these is going to be through private entrepreneurs and private companies. These were all of the people who were speaking at this TBI summit. People from Google, AI entrepreneurs, specific people who left their roles as wanting to foment this kind of an entrepreneurial spirit in society to get into the AI investment sphere. They had Will.i.am, right? Taking some time away from ruining popular music forever to go and talk about his new AI project to how it can essentially take over the role of creatives in our society. And again, these are all private individuals. They're not doing things for the public good. These are not cooperatively owned or state-owned organizations who are going to be absorbing all of the money from these productivity gains. These are private individuals who are going to essentially, as you say, lead to layoffs, both public and private. And there's going to be no remuneration back to the people who are actually still doing all of the work on top of that, who aren't just rentiers using technology to make money off of everybody else, absorbing even further the capital and the money in our society and the wealth in our society upwards into the hands of very, very few. So if this continues and we do not have this democratization of those productivity gains that technological advancements will get, we'll just have the government acting as an arm to sell off those gains to private companies, whether it's going to be in the NHS or in the civil service, etc. Are the regular people going to see those gains? No, we're just going to get shoved onto dole queues. That is dangerous for the future.
I know some people are watching this thinking, Aaron likes technology, doesn't he? I'm confused. You don't just implement technology for the sake of implementing technology. That's actually a very stupid thing to do. You tend to waste lots of money. Look at a lot of the big software projects with the NHS in recent years where people were automating stuff they didn't really need to automate, right? So I like technology where it's useful. But that's not always the case. And I've got very strong views on this. I won't go into them. Technopoly, just read it, by Neil Postman. The point as well about the Labour right being central to this, Helena, is so true. And the idea that Google will speak at something saying, this is the solution to all these problems, and by the way, we're selling it. Why would you listen to them? So stupid. We have 3,000 of you watching. We're not stupid. We know the score. You've got $300 million going towards the Tony Blair Institute from Oracle, and then the Tony Blair Institute saying that the NHS needs to spend a ton on data services. It's really not hard to work out what's going on. Britain's privatised water industry is a byword for how things have gone wrong over the last 40 years. But the story of Thames Water is particularly emblematic of that wider failure. The company is responsible for both water supply and wastewater treatment across most of Greater London, Luton, the Thames Valley, Surrey, Gloucestershire, North Wiltshire and West Kent. And like other water companies, it has a monopoly in those regions. The company in its present form was founded in 1989, when the Thatcher government oversaw a wave of privatisations in public utilities, from telecoms and energy to rail and water. Back then, the company had zero debt. Today, meanwhile, it has £15 billion of debt. Slight difference. Across the entire water industry, that figure for debt is £54 billion. And over that same period, Thames Water has paid over £7 billion in dividends. That's regular payments made to shareholders because the company is such a success story. So far, so bad. But a report published a few weeks ago shows things are even worse than we thought. This from the Financial Times. Thames Water warns aging assets pose, quote, risk to public safety. Quite extraordinary. The management of Thames Water as a private company over the last 3.5 decades has now created a threat to public safety. Their words. That warning comes from a company report where Thames Water admit to having £19 billion worth of assets in poor or failed condition, or worse yet, are, quote, no longer capable of reliably performing their function. There's crumbling pipes, obsolete monitoring technology, and a shortage of reservoirs. The FT also outlined the hazards incurred from years of underinvestment, and these include the following. The risk of rapid flooding of 37,545 basement properties in London because, quote, they are located near the main water trunk mains, which are bursting more frequently. And risks from Cryptosporidium oocysts, a parasite in drinking water that can cause diarrhea, as the 4 large London water processing plants require upgrades. So Thames Water has £19 billion of assets in a state of disrepair, obsolete monitoring technology, not enough reservoirs. Meanwhile, it paid £7 billion in dividends and has taken on £15 billion worth of debt. We have £22 billion going out and £19 billion is needed. Now, I'm not a PhD in economics. I just studied a few modules. I wasn't that good. But even to me, this sounds kind of stupid. And also we can have a system which literally makes people sick and floods tens of thousands of homes. We've paid for that. The public has paid for a situation where we can get ill and people can lose everything. And by the way, Thames Water now wants to increase household bills from around £471 a year to £749 in 2029-2030. That's nearly a 60% increase. And that's after water bills increased by about 40% higher than inflation, more broadly, since privatisation in the 1980s. So you've had the base rate of inflation since 1989. Water bills have been 40% above that. And now, in the next 5 to 6 years, water bills are going to be 60% higher than where they presently are. At the same time, we've had a tsunami of effluent in our rivers and waterways from the likes of Thames Water. In 2022, raw sewage was pumped into rivers and coasts 375,000 times in 1 year. Not a single river in England has a clean bill of health. Not one. But wait, there's more. Thames Water is looking to tap up investors because it only has enough cash liquid capital to keep it going through to May next year. So not even 12 months. And yet, this news appeared just today. Thames Water pays out £158 million to shareholders, despite £15 billion of debt and sewage leak failings. Remarkable. My jaw dropped seeing the story. That article in The Independent goes on to say this. Thames Water has confirmed it paid 2 fresh dividends worth £158.3 million in March, as the heavily indebted company, slight understatement, said it is unlikely to raise fresh funds before December. The water company, which is creaking under a debt pile of more than £15 billion, said it paid the dividends to help fund 2 of its holding companies, Kemble Eurobond and Thames Water Limited, which are in financial trouble. Ofwat has said, that's the water regulator, has already said it is minded to take action against Thames Water for a smaller £37.5 million dividend payment in October 2023. So Thames Water literally doesn't have enough cash to survive 12 months, but it's paying dividends, even now. They paid £195 million in dividends the year before, and then there's this figure of £153 million. And all this after accumulating £15 billion of debt and openly saying they need to spend £19 billion to update their infrastructure. But they're still paying dividends. How on earth is this legal? How have people honestly not faced some kind of prosecution or at the very least been disqualified from being company directors? But wait! Really, it gets worse again. Chris Weston, who joined as chief executive in January this year, took a £195,000 bonus for the 3 months at the end of March, taking his total pay to £437,000. That's right. The guy in charge of all of this made almost £200,000 as a bonus in 3 months. Alistair Cochrane, Chief Finance Officer, received total pay of £1.3 million for 12 months to the end of March, including a £446,000 bonus. How? Talk about rewarding failure. We have completely screwed the taxpayer. We've completely screwed the consumer. We're going to screw the taxpayer more. We're going to screw the consumer more. But don't worry, you'll get your dividend. And if you're the CEO, my goodness, you'll get a ridiculous bonus. See how it works? Steam coming out of my ears as I say that story. It's just unbelievable. Labour have won a stomping majority, but it's clear that Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza has cost him the trust of many British Muslims. Polling from Savanta places Gaza as the #1 policy issue for a fifth of Muslim voters, with nearly half citing it in their top 5 most important issues. And this graph from Focal Data shows how Labour hemorrhaged Muslim votes during the election. Of these 7 seats Labour lost, 5 were in constituencies where more than a quarter of the population is Muslim. And in terms of the national picture, research ahead of the election suggested that the number of Muslims voting for Labour could have dropped by 20% since 2019. ITV's Shahab Khan put those results to Keir Starmer.
Prime Minister, you secured a significant landslide at the general election, but in areas where there's a high Muslim population, Labour either lost seats or had their vote share slash. Do you accept that there's a problem with the relationship between the Labour Party and British Muslims at the moment?
Well, the first thing I'd say is this, that very many people voted Labour in that general election who've never voted Labour before. So we now hold seats in parts of the country that have never had a Labour MP. So this is an incredibly strong mandate. Of course, wherever we weren't able to secure votes, I'm concerned about that. But this is a clear mandate for change, for renewal, for a different way of doing politics and a return of politics to service. The days of self-entitlement and self-interest are over. And I'm really pleased to put a strong team on the pitch to start our work and to be completing here in Wales my visits to Scotland, to Northern Ireland and Wales, which is about
what about the issue with British Muslims? Trust has clearly broken down there. The election results show that. What are you going to do to try and rebuild it?
Well, we've got a strong mandate. Of course, where we didn't secure the votes, we'll address that. But I don't think there's any disputing the strength of the mandate that we have and that it's a mandate for change, for renewal and for politics as public service.
Crazy response. By the way, Keir Starmer is the sort of person, overtly we know that, he said it, Jeremy Corbyn wasn't listening to the Jewish community. The exact same genre of question is put to Keir Starmer. He doesn't care. He gives non-answers because this is all it's a game for these people, right? If you want a friend in politics, get a dog. So Starmer there is asked twice about what he'll do to win back the trust of British Muslims. And twice, he basically ignored the question. It's a similar answer to that given by Jonathan Reynolds on the Sunday morning rounds, the same question. So it's clear this is the agreed line coming from the Labour leadership. Muslim Labour MP Bastani Begum strongly condemned the Prime Minister's apparent indifference, telling ITV's Shahab Khan this. This is an awful response from Keir and lacks any acknowledgement of the need to build trust among British Muslims who feel that Labour has let them down. Labour's position on Gaza, especially Starmer's infamous comments about Israel's right to cut off electricity to Gaza, come up over and over again during the election across the country and clearly lost Labour votes. There is no doubt that lots of voters have serious concerns about Starmer's record on Gaza, Islamophobia and migration, amongst a number of other issues. This was an opportunity for Keir to assure British Muslims he was listening, an opportunity ignored. Quite brave, I think. I mean, given Starmer's proclivity to removing the whip from any dissenting Labour MPs, but I think two things have changed that, right? One is the fact Labour have a big majority. Okay, you can have some dissenters, fine. The other is that you've now got these independents on Gaza. Okay, take the whip from Bastani Begum, she's going to join them. So what? And by the way, because of the politics in her constituency, she'd keep the seat. Labour could have lost a lot more MPs on this issue, and they should count themselves lucky that they didn't. Helena, Starmer appears to have calculated that Labour can afford not to care about the concerns of Muslim voters. Is that stupid? Could this come back to bite him?
I mean, it will certainly come back to bite them in the next election, 100%, 100%. I mean, it was their electoral strategy. They were very open. Morgan McSween was very open about the electoral strategy, this maximization of voter efficiency. It doesn't matter if some Muslims don't vote for us, if progressive millennials don't vote for us. If we performatively flagellate them, we might curry favour in swing constituencies amongst voters that we need to win over to try and have a large majority that we've got. It was a successful electoral strategy, but it's clear to them that they believe that they can perform so well in government, they can keep the voters they've won this year round. And if however many years down the line, urban constituencies, Leeds, Birmingham, Bristol, London, Manchester, all of these places with larger communities, for example, of people from Muslim backgrounds or from just progressive backgrounds, they might turn to different parties, other independents, Green Party candidates, etc., etc. They've made that calculation already that they don't have to be able to care about these things anymore. Now, obviously, this is going to inflame tensions further, but are they going to be held accountable for it outside of Shahab Khan from ITV? Well, clearly not. We've clearly seen our media are very happy to inflame these tensions further. Indeed, they don't even bother looking or caring themselves in the media or within our political establishment about the concerns of Muslims. Was there an AHRC report into internal Islamophobia in the Conservative Party? No, that got scrapped, didn't it? And as you say, we always talk about, well, when we have to, if a certain community has a problem with the party, we needed to address that from 2015 to 2019. But when Muslims are concerned, no, don't have to worry about that. That's the problem for Iqbal Mohammed and Ayub Khan now in their position as independent MPs, for example. One thing I also want to take to task as well here is that the media have been talking about this idea, independents being elected on Gaza tickets, or this is political sectarianism. I can't believe they care far more about Gaza than they do about their own constituencies. When first of all, these independents still got elected on platforms including things like social justice and public services and all of the things that regular constituency MPs would want to campaign on. But on top of that, this is a big issue, the issue of what's happening in Palestine right now, but not just for Muslims. Right? The British public supports our position. 70% of the public wanted there to be a ceasefire months ago. 56% of people in the UK think Israel has committed war crimes. The plurality opinion, when asked which side do you sympathize more with in the Israel-Palestine conflict, the plurality opinion is sympathizing with Palestine, right? Above even people who sympathize with both sides and way above people who sympathize with Israel. The idea that this is somehow a Muslim community issue, they're the ones who are happy to change their voting patterns upon this. But in terms of the democratic mandate that they have to continue to not listen to these concerns is complete nonsense when the UK broadly supports these things. And you never heard, right? You never heard people decrying the sectarianism about things happening in terms of geopolitics when Brexit was a salient political issue, when people abandoned Labour for the Lib Dems over Brexit, right, for example. And on top of that, we've just had people saying, Nigel Farage might have been a big player in electoral politics, but no one can vote for him now because he has said things that were pro-Putin in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Things I obviously disagree with. I broadly disagree with there are lots of good reasons for me not to vote Reform UK. But the primary reason these people are putting forward as why you cannot support Nigel Farage is a sectarian issue, as they would call it, on geopolitics. There's just complete lack of any amount of consistency in what they determine to be sectarianism and what they don't determine to be sectarianism. And again, it's Muslims who get the bad end of the stick of this. They're the community who can be compartmentalized into being sectarian. Everybody else, though, when they're making electoral decisions solely on the realm of geopolitics, that's fine. That's just democracy doing its job. And I find that it's Islamophobia from the press. It just is from an institutionally Islamophobic institution.
So true. In 2005, the Lib Dems got so many votes off the back of opposition to the Iraq War. I think because this country was less diverse then than it is now. If that happened today, if you had this massive reaction against foreign policy decision, I think Telegraph, the Times, they would all say, oh, it's because of Muslims and brown people. Well, actually, all kinds of people voted against that war because it was insane. In a democracy, people can express their views and their political preferences how they choose. That's literally the point of democracy. Helena, thanks as ever for joining me this evening.
Absolutely a pleasure, as always, to be back. Thank you very much, and I look forward to next time.
We need high speed because you're in Nottingham. We need a high speed train to Nottingham so we can get Helena to host and do all sorts of things and not just be virtual. And thanks everyone for watching this evening. Come back tomorrow night for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.